heavy.
Bored.
Anybody who said that
yeah.
fad is short-lived is a terrible scholar. Is a terrible. If you think
Just
the fad,
incorrect.
Yeah.
Well,
like if- yeah.
right, but he's also saying like first, like these are the views of it that people seem to
Right.
have. That either it was like like that the whole beat poet thing was just like
divided a lot of
sort of a
scholars.
fad.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And it divided scholars. They thought it was garbage, and then a lot of them that like thought it was cool, and
which is going to happen, of course, with like any
which
sort
I
of
guess
major shift.
yeah, and I guess we can talk about the beats now. Fuck it, we'll just say like, what do we think of the beats in general? I know what I think, but Soph.
I mean, when you say the beats, as though there are so many of them.
Well, there's
No.
really only like 4. Yeah. There's
Yeah,
really only 4
like,
that
I
matter.
mean-
And I would argue there's only one that
And
matters.
how many? Yeah, and only one of them is really a poet, right? Like, what other beat poets do we have?
There were a couple, they just weren't good.
I
During
mean-
there was a female one that like kind of got shoved in there during this last 10 years of like, let's change everything and pretend that there was like, you know, all this talent that went wasted or something because of sexism or something. So they like pulled out a few female writers of that time, and they're trying to shove them into I can't even think of their names right now, but I remember a couple years ago, I think like the New Yorker or somebody did a big write-up on like a couple of the female beat poets that we don't remember because they aren't good. Like it's just
God, Kenneth Patchen, people fucking
yeah,
love
he's no
Kenneth
good.
Patchen.
Like
But people also lump in some of the poets who came right after who were really, really inspired by it. Like, you know, Gary Snyder is the one I think
Yeah.
of.
well,
But
like,
the big
you
ones that
can't
people talk about
not
are
be.
Ginsberg, they talk about Burroughs, and they talk about Kerouac, right?
Yeah,
like
those are the big three,
the big
yeah.
three that people
refer
discuss
to
when
when
they
say the
talk
beats.
about the beats, but like we talk about the beat poets like it's this big
Right.
I mean, and there were other poets, like there were, but they're not as famous. They weren't as like major, like according to, let's see, Poetry Foundation. It lists Lawrence Ferlinghetti. So again, City Lights.
And he was kind of like
bookshop
the
guy.
Frank O'Hara or the
Richard
Gertrude
Brodigan.
Stein of
This
the
is
era.
another name that I hear a lot. So Richard Brodigan, Gregory Corso, Allen Ginsberg, Michael McClure, Jack Hirschman, Kenneth Patchen, Diane DePrima, who I know nothing of.
She's one of the ones that they've tried to like kind of retrograde into it as if she was. I mean, no doubt she was part of the movement. She was a publishing poet at the time. She just, again, like it just wasn't as good as the others, as basically as Ginsberg stuff. And I've said this for a while now, like since I've actually read some of this stuff. I don't know how much a lot of listeners have read. Everybody pretends that they've read On the Road. Everybody pretends that they've read Naked Lunch and stuff like that. It's like kind of like Moby Dick, where like a lot of scholars
Hate both of
pretend that they've
those.
read these. I've tried to read. I've read a few Kerouac books.
Yeah.
I've read a few Burroughs books, and again, those guys wrote more fiction. Really, they were kind of the first auto-fiction type guys that did this. And I have to say, I say this all the time, Ginsberg is the only beat worth remembering.
Yep.
Like, he is the only beat worth remembering. Like, if you read Kerouac, I mean, you know, sure, people think I'm wrong on this, go ahead and put it in the comments, like, because if you read Kerouac, and I mean any of his books, you can read On the Road, you can read some of his most famous, which is probably his most famous, and you can read any of his minor stuff, and then, like, it's not good. Like, it is hard to read. It is rambling. It is this lofty kind of philosophical bullshit that I can't stand. And, you know, On the Road is the most famous one. I've read Desolation Angels. I've read The Dharma Bums. I've read, you know, On the Road. And I am just not a Kerouac fan. Although I think what people like about the beats is this kind of fuck you, kind of drifting through the world, experiencing things kind of stuff that they wrote about. Burroughs,
Yeah, until it gets
I've read-
obnoxious.
yeah, and Burroughs, I've read Naked Lunch. I've read his best book, The Exterminators, was his best book. But it's like, Burroughs gets this huge reputation, but like when you read his work, it is, I can't see it as anything other than the kind of incoherent ramblings and like notes of a heroin addict. Like that's what it is. So you're reading his incoherent, like rambling kind of half-assed stories of this guy just being so whacked out of his mind on heroin that like he could not have been like a decent like writer if he tried, because like it's just, and people can disagree with me on that, but again, I think Kerouac and Burroughs and Ginsberg to an extent are romanticized beyond what they actually contributed apart from Ginsberg. Ginsberg contributed more than any of them, I think. But yeah, that's my whole spiel on the beats and like studying the beats.
Yeah, I mean, I too
you guys
had
can
a
read for
really hard
yourselves
time
and
with
see if you're
Kerouac.
disappointed.
I had a hard time with Burroughs. I never found myself drawn. Some people might argue that it's, you know, because they're both like really, I don't know, would you say masculine? Like, I'm not even sure that that is, like, they are.
Even though Burroughs...
Inner.
Resources. American resources.
Being bored?
Some activities are intentional, right?
It shows such a lack of gratitude for life. Bored. I aspire to boredom, I should say.
Bored. Heavy.
I am heavy.
Bored.
Has you the night sweats and the day sweats, pal? Pal, I do.